The final closing of the farmhouse door sounded less like a latch clicking and more like the crack of a bone. On one side stood Silas, her late husband's brother, his face a mask of grim duty. On the other stood Ilara, with nothing but the dust of the road ahead of her and the weight of 20 silver dollars in her palm. The coins were cold, each one a tiny gravestone for the life she had known. Silas had been meticulous, laying out the ledgers on the rough-hewn table, his finger tracing lines of debt Liam had supposedly left behind. The farm, the livestock, the house filled with the ghosts of her own laughter, all of it was swallowed by those spidery black numbers. All that remained for her was a deed, a piece of paper Silas had produced with a sigh of magnanimity, as if bestowing a great gift. It was for a plot of land 3 miles north of Providence Gulch, a place known only by its reputation, a collapsed limestone quarry on a worthless patch of sun-scorched earth. It was a joke of a property, a place where nothing grew and no man had ever tried to build. It was his final, quiet insult, a way of washing his hands of her without appearing entirely monstrous to the church folk. He was giving her a place to die, not a place to live. She had $20, the worn dress on her back, the sturdy boots Liam had bought for her last autumn, and Boro, Liam's lanky hound, whose head now rested mournfully on her knee. The dog was the only living thing that looked at her without pity or judgment. In the town's mercantile, Mr. Gable had watched her count her coins, his expression one of practiced sympathy. He was a man whose kindness always came with a price tag. "A sad business, Ilara, a sad business indeed," he had murmured, polishing a glass jar with a clean cloth. "The coach east leaves on Thursday. That money might just get you to the city. A woman alone has no place out here." His advice was practical, sensible, and felt like a small, sharp stone in her shoe. Others in the store nodded, their faces etched with the same grim certainty. They saw a widow, a victim, a charity case in the making. They saw an ending. Ilara looked at her reflection in the jar Gable was polishing. A pale, thin face, framed by brown hair pulled back in a severe knot. She saw the exhaustion in her own eyes, but beneath it, something else flickered. It was not hope, not yet. It was the hard, cold refusal to break. She had spent her life learning the rhythms of the land, the language of seasons, the alchemy of turning milk into cheese, a skill passed down from her mother. She would not become a beggar in a city of strangers. She pushed a few of the silver dollars across the counter. "I'll need an axe," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "A good one, and a shovel." Gable's eyebrows lifted. He exchanged a look with a trapper leaning against a barrel. The look said it all. The poor girl's grief has turned her mind. But a sale was a sale. He sold her the tools, along with a sack of salt and a small flint and steel. With her remaining coins, she did not buy a coach ticket. She walked to the edge of town where a farmer was selling off livestock. She bought a single, ornery-looking dairy goat for a price that was probably too high, but she had no energy for haggling. Leading the goat by a rope, with Boro trotting silently at her heel and the axe handle digging into her shoulder, she turned her back on Providence Gulch. She did not look back at the curious faces watching from windows and doorways. She faced north, toward the worthless land, and began to walk. The sun was high and hot, and the road was nothing but a ribbon of pale dust unwinding into a barren wilderness. Each step was an act of defiance. They had left her with nothing, but she still had the ground beneath her feet and the sky above her head. It would have to be enough. The journey was a blur of thirst and aching muscles. The goat was stubborn, pulling against the rope, bleeding its displeasure. Boro, sensing her grim mood, stayed close, his panting a steady rhythm beside her. The landscape grew harsher, the gentle, rolling pastures around Providence Gulch giving way to rocky scrubland and thorny brush. The weight of the axe and shovel felt immense, a physical manifestation of the impossible task ahead. By the second day, the silence of the wilderness had settled deep into her bones. It was a profound and lonely quiet, broken only by the wind and the scuttling of unseen creatures. She arrived at the boundary of her property near dusk. There was no fence, only a single, weather-beaten wooden marker, half swallowed by the earth. And beyond it, the land was just as they'd said. It was a wasteland. The ground was a hard pan of clay and stone, littered with shards of limestone that crunched under her boots. A few skeletal trees clung to life, their branches twisted into desperate shapes by the relentless wind. In the center of it all was the quarry. It was not a grand canyon, but a ragged, gaping wound in the earth, a chaotic jumble of fallen rock and debris where the land had simply given up and collapsed in on itself. This was her inheritance. A hole, a grave. Ilara sank to her knees, the rope to the goat going slack in her hand. The sheer, crushing hopelessness of it washed over her. The town was right. Silas was right. Gable was right. Coming here was a fool's errand, a final, desperate act of a woman who had lost everything, including her senses. Tears she had refused to shed in town now burned hot in her eyes, carving clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks. Boro whined and nudged his wet nose into her hand, a silent, comforting presence in the vast emptiness. For a long, dark moment, she believed her story ended here, in this desolate place, another forgotten soul swallowed by the frontier. But the wind was picking up, a cold knife slicing across the open plain. It carried the promise of a frigid night. Survival was a more immediate instinct than despair. She had to find shelter, if only for one night. She scrambled to her feet, tethered the goat to a stunted tree, and, with Boro at her heels, cautiously approached the mouth of the quarry. The entrance was a treacherous slope of loose rock and soil, leading down into a dark maw. She picked her way down, dislodging small stones that skittered into the darkness below. As she descended deeper, out of the direct path of the wind, she felt it. The air changed. The howling of the wind outside softened to a distant whisper. But more than that, the temperature dropped. It was not the damp, stagnant cold of a cellar. It was a living coolness, a deep and profound chill that seemed to emanate from the very rock around her. She placed her raw palm against a massive, sheer wall of limestone, and it felt like pressing her hand against a block of winter ice. The stone was breathing cold. Intrigued, she pushed further into the darkness, her eyes slowly adjusting. The quarry was not just a pit. It was a network of small, interconnected caves and fissures created by the collapse. And then she heard it, a sound so faint it was almost imperceptible. Drip, drip, drip. She followed the sound to a dark corner where a fissure snaked up through the rock. From it, a tiny, impossibly clear bead of water emerged, hesitated, and fell onto a stone below. It was a slow, patient rhythm, a steady heartbeat in the heart of the stone. She touched her finger to the water. It was pure and achingly cold. She stood there in the cool, silent darkness, listening to the water, feeling the chill seep into her bones. This was the secret. This was the hidden advantage. The world above was at the mercy of the burning sun and the freezing wind. But down here, the earth kept its own counsel. The limestone held the memory of winter all through the hottest summer, and this steady, seeping water was life itself. Despair did not vanish, but it receded, replaced by a grim, formidable resolve. The town had seen a worthless hole. Her mother, a master cheesemaker, would have seen a cathedral. This was not a grave. It was a cellar. It was a dairy. It was a home. The work began at dawn the next day. It was a battle fought with her own 2 hands against a mountain of rock. Her first task was to clear the entrance, to turn the treacherous slope into a stable path. She used the shovel to move the loose earth and the axe, brutally, to pry smaller rocks from the dirt. The larger limestone blocks, some as big as trunks, had to be moved with leverage and raw, screaming effort. She used a stout branch as a lever, her entire body straining, muscles she didn't know she had, burning with a fire that eclipsed the sun above. Her hands, softened by years of domestic work, were the first casualties. Blisters formed, broke, and bled, leaving her palms raw and stinging with sweat and dirt. She tore strips from her petticoat to wrap them, but the rough work shredded the cloth within hours. There were moments of agonizing failure, when a rock she'd spent an hour moving would slip and tumble back to where it started, undoing all her progress. In those moments, she would stand, breathing heavily, hands on her hips, and stare at the unyielding stone, the silence of the quarry her only witness. Then, she would bend her back and begin again. Slowly, painstakingly, a space began to form. She was not just clearing, she was building. She sorted the stones she moved. The flat, stable ones were stacked to create low retaining walls, shoring up the loose soil. The smaller, jagged rocks became fill. She discovered a deposit of dense clay near a creek bed a half-mile away, and began the back-breaking process of hauling it, bucket by bucket, back to the quarry. She mixed it with lime dust scraped from the quarry walls and water from the seep, creating a crude but effective mortar. Day by day, a structure emerged from the chaos. She chose the largest of the natural caves as her main living chamber. Using the quarried limestone blocks and her clay mortar, she built a solid front wall, leaving openings for a door and a small window. It was slow, agonizing work. Lifting each stone into place was a trial of strength and balance. Her body transformed, shedding its softness for hard lines of muscle. The pain in her back and shoulders became a constant companion, a dull ache that she learned to live with, like the sound of her own heartbeat. For the roof, she felled the tough, scrubby pines on her land. Limbing them with the axe was exhausting, and dragging the logs to the quarry opening left deep furrows in the earth and in her soul. But she learned the mechanics of it, the geometry of leverage and balance. She laid the logs across the top of her stone walls, chinking the gaps with a thick mixture of clay and dried grass. Finally, she built a door from planks split from the largest of the logs, with a simple wooden latch. The first time she closed it, shutting out the howling wind, the silence inside was absolute. It was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. With a basic shelter secured, she turned her focus to the systems that would sustain her. The fireplace was first. She identified a natural fissure in the rock at the back of her chamber that snaked its way to the surface. It was a perfect chimney. She built a hearth of flat stones beneath it, mortared with clay. The first fire she lit was a miracle. The smoke drew perfectly up the fissure, and the warmth pushed back the deep, subterranean chill of the stone. For the first time in months, she felt a profound, bone-deep warmth that was not from the sun. That night, she slept on a bed of pine boughs, burro curled at her feet, the fire casting flickering shadows on her stone walls. She was not just surviving, she was living. Next was the water. The slow drip from the fissure was reliable, but painstakingly slow. She spent a week carving a shallow basin into the stone floor beneath it, then lined the entire depression with a thick layer of the creek clay, packing it down until it was watertight. The water slowly pooled, creating a small, pristine cistern. It was her well, her spring, her source of life, protected from the dust and heat of the world above. Then came the heart of her entire endeavor, the dairy. She chose the deepest, coldest cavern in the quarry, a place the summer heat would never touch. The air there was still and consistently cool, perfect for aging cheese. She spent weeks building shelves, not of wood, which might rot in the damp, but of flat limestone slabs she painstakingly chipped and leveled. She built a simple press from scavenged wood. Her single goat, whom she had named Patience, provided a small but steady supply of rich milk. The process was a ritual, a connection to her mother and the life she had lost. She heated the milk over her fire, added the rennet, cut the curds, and pressed the whey. The motions were ingrained in her memory. When she placed the first small white wheel of cheese on a stone shelf in the cold, dark cave, it felt like a sacred act. She was not just making food, she was creating a future. She was turning this worthless rock into a vessel of preservation and hope. In an adjacent alcove, she built a sturdy, roofed pen for Patience, secure from wolves and mountain lions. It was connected to her own living quarters, their shared warmth and proximity, a comfort during the long, lonely nights. The world she was building was a closed system, a fortress of self-reliance carved into the earth. But self-reliance had its limits. She ran out of salt. Her supply of grain for the goat was dwindling. She needed more than what this barren land could offer. She needed chickens for eggs and seeds for a garden. She needed to trade. With a deep breath, she packed 2 of her earliest, smallest wheels of cheese into a basket, left Boro to guard her home, and made the long walk back to Providence Gulch. The town looked different now, smaller and louder than she remembered. Her appearance at Gable's Mercantile caused a stir. Whispers followed her down the aisle. Her clothes were rougher, her face tanned and leaner, her hands calloused and scarred. She looked like a creature of the wilderness, not the grieving widow they remembered. Mr. Gable's eyes widened when she placed the cheese on his counter. He unwrapped the damp cloth, a smirk playing on his lips. "Well, well, the Quarry Queen returns. What is this?" "Goat cheese," Ilara said simply. "I need salt, seeds, and chicken feed." He poked the cheese with a fat finger, then sniffed it with theatrical disdain. "Grown in that damp hole? I'm surprised it isn't green with poison. I'll give you a few pennies for it, out of pity." The derision in his voice was a physical blow, but Ilara did not flinch. She remembered her mother's pride, the value she placed on her work. She quietly wrapped the cheese back up. "No thank you," she said, and turned to leave. His mockery echoed in her ears, but it did not defeat her. She bypassed the mercantile and walked directly to the Miller farm on the edge of town. Mistress Miller was a woman who understood the value of hard work. She looked at Ilara's hands, then at the cheese. She tasted a small piece, her eyes closing in thought. "This is good," she said, her voice filled with surprise. "Clean taste. Firm." A trade was struck. The 2 wheels of cheese for a sack of salt, a small bag of corn, and 2 noisy, healthy hens. As Ilara left the Miller farm, the hens clucking in a crate on her back, she heard the whispers of children. "It's the Cave Girl," they said, a new nickname to replace the old. The name didn't sting, it was after all true. She was a girl of the cave, a woman of the stone, and she was still here. Boro was her shadow, her confidant, her first line of defense. In the crushing solitude of the quarry, the dog's presence was an anchor. He would lie with his head on her lap as she mended her clothes by the fire, his deep sighs filling the quiet space. When the unnerving sound of a coyote's howl echoed from the plains, his low growl was a comforting reassurance. He learned the boundaries of their small world, patrolling the rim of the quarry, his sharp barks a warning to any predator that ventured too close. One evening, a large mountain lion, drawn by the scent of the goat, appeared on the ridge. its silhouette a sleek and terrifying shape against the twilight sky. Before Elara could even reach for her axe, Boro launched himself up the path, not with aggression, but with a ferocious, sustained barrage of barking that gave the predator pause. He held his ground, a fearless guardian, until the cat, unnerved by the noise and the scent of a defended territory, finally slipped away into the shadows. That night, she shared her meager portion of dried meat with him, her hand resting on his warm, familiar fur. He was more than a pet. He was her partner in this solitary existence. The town's mockery solidified into a local legend. She became the Quarry Witch, a reclusive, half-mad figure living in a hole in the ground. The story, mostly spun by Gable to discourage anyone from trading with her, was that she was making poisoned cheese from bitter roots and cave mold. Children dared each other to run to the edge of her property and back. The nickname, the Folly, had stuck to the place itself. The Widow's Folly, they called it, a monument to one woman's grief-stricken foolishness. Gable himself made the trip out once, in late autumn. He rode up on his fine horse, positioning himself on the ridge above the quarry as if surveying a disaster. Elara, hauling water from her cistern, simply stopped and watched him. He saw the rough stone wall, the crude door, the tethered goat. He saw what he wanted to see: poverty, desperation, and failure. "Still here, are you?" he called down, his voice dripping with condescension. "Winter is coming, girl. That pile of rocks won't keep out the cold. There's still time to admit you were wrong. The church has a charity bed." Elara said nothing. She picked up her bucket and walked back inside her stone home, closing the solid wooden door behind her. The click of the latch was her only reply. His laughter echoed from the ridge, a harsh, grating sound that the wind soon carried away. He rode off, more convinced than ever of his own wisdom, and spread the tale of her pathetic hovel all over town. But winter, when it came, was not her enemy. It was her vindication. The first blizzard hit Providence Gulch like a hammer, burying the town in 3 feet of snow. Wooden farmhouses creaked and groaned under the weight. The wind found every crack in the walls, and families huddled around their fireplaces, burning through their woodpiles at an alarming rate. In Elara's quarry home, the storm was a distant roar. The earth and stone that surrounded her were a perfect insulation. The temperature inside her chamber remained steady, cool, but not dangerously cold. Her small fire provided more than enough heat, its warmth held and radiated back by the massive stone hearth. Her world shrank to a simple, sustainable rhythm. In the mornings, she would milk patience, her breath pluming in the cool air. She would tend the hens, who were safely sheltered in their pen. She would make cheese, the quiet, methodical process, a meditation against the storm's fury. She would check her stores, mend her tools, and read the one book she owned, a tattered copy of poems, by the light of the fire. She was utterly alone, sovereign of a tiny, subterranean kingdom, and she was safe. The winter provided smaller tests that proved her design. A mid-January thaw caused a sudden flood in the creek bed, turning the lowlands into a muddy torrent. But her cistern, fed by the earth itself, remained clear and full. Later, a pack of hungry wolves, emboldened by the deep snow, grew daring. They circled her quarry for 2 nights, their howls a chilling chorus. But the solid door and stone walls were impenetrable, and Boro's vigilant presence kept them from attempting any direct assault. Each challenge overcome was another stone laid in the foundation of her confidence. She was not just surviving the winter, she was mastering it. The spring thaw was a relief, but it brought with it a precursor to the true crisis. A strange, persistent dampness seemed to settle over the region. In town, cellars grew musty, and some of the winter stores began to show the first signs of rot. But it was the summer that brought the reckoning. The heat arrived not as a gentle warming, but as a punishing, suffocating blanket. The sun beat down from a cloudless, metallic sky, baking the very life out of the earth. The creek on Ilara's land slowed to a trickle, but her seep, deep within the limestone, continued its steady, cool drip. Then came the blight. It started in the cornfields, a gray, dusty film that shriveled the stalks. It spread to the vegetable gardens, wilting leaves and rotting produce on the vine. Providence Gulch's confidence, rooted in its larders and smokehouses, began to crumble. The relentless heat soured milk within hours of it leaving the cow. Smoked hams and bacon, hanging in sheds and cellars that were now as warm as ovens, began to spoil, a sickeningly sweet smell of decay hanging over the town. Gables Mercantile, once the proud heart of the community's prosperity, became a house of flies and rot. Barrels of salted fish turned rancid. Sacks of flour grew weevils. His own carefully constructed cellar was no match for the oppressive, deep-seated heat. The town's conventional wisdom, its reliable methods of preservation, had failed. Fear, a far more virulent contagion than any blight, began to spread. People grew thin, their diets reduced to the last of the dry goods. The children, in particular, began to suffer, their bodies weakened by poor nutrition and the oppressive heat. In her quarry, Ilara was an island in a sea of decay. The deep, thermal mass of the limestone held the winter's chill. While the air outside shimmered with heat, her dairy cave remained as cool and still as an autumn evening. The cheese on her stone shelves was perfect. The wheels were aging slowly, developing a rich, nutty flavor, each one a small, dense package of protein and fat. Her small garden, planted in a shaded alcove near the quarry mouth and watered daily from her cistern, produced a meager but vital supply of greens and beans. The heat was an inconvenience, but it was not a threat. She was not fighting the summer. She was simply living outside of its reach. The systems she had built through a year of brutal labor were holding. The town was wrong. The first visitor from the broken world arrived on a blistering afternoon. It was not a man with a gun, demanding food, but a woman, stumbling with desperation. It was Martha Gable, the mercantile owner's wife. Her dress was stained with sweat, her face pale with panic. She practically fell down the path to Ilara's door, her frantic banging echoing in the cool stone. Ilara opened the door, Boro growling softly at her side. She saw the raw terror in the woman's eyes. "Please," Martha gasped, her voice cracking. "My daughter, Lena. She has the fever. She's so weak. She won't eat anything we have. The doctor says she needs nourishment, something clean. I know what my husband said about you, about this place, but we have nothing left. Please." Ilara looked at the woman's desperate face. She saw the shadow of Mr. Gable's mockery, heard the echo of his laughter from the ridge. A bitter, cold anger could have risen in her. She could have closed the door. She could have reminded this woman of every whispered insult, of every derisive nickname. She had earned the right to her bitterness. She looked at her own stores, the carefully stacked wheels of cheese, each one representing days of hard labor, her insurance against the future. Helping them would come at a cost to her own security. But then she thought of the child, Lena, a small girl with bright ribbons in her hair she had seen once in town. She thought of a fever in this heat, of a small body wasting away. The choice was not a choice at all. It was a simple, human imperative. She would help, not because they deserved it, but because she could. The moral core of her, forged in solitude and hardship, was stronger than any resentment. She nodded curtly and turned back into her home. She did not offer platitudes or false comfort. Her response was action. She went to her dairy cave and selected a wheel of her youngest, mildest cheese, the easiest for a sick stomach to digest. She filled a clay jug with cold, clean water from her cistern. She wrapped the cheese and a small handful of beans in a clean cloth, placed them in a basket, and handed it to Martha Gable. Then she did something more. "I will come," she said. She secured her home, gave Boro a quiet command to stay and guard, and followed the frantic mother back towards the town. The walk was a journey into a different world. The heat was a physical assault. The air in Providence Gulch was thick with the smell of dust and decay. The faces she saw were hollowed out by hunger and despair. It was a town that had been broken by the very nature it thought it had conquered. Her arrival with Martha Gable caused a stir, but no one mocked her now. They just stared, their eyes filled with a desperate, questioning hope. Later that week, Mr. Gable himself appeared at the quarry. He was a changed man. His usual swagger was gone, replaced by a stooped, humbled posture. His face was gaunt, his eyes shadowed with sleeplessness and fear. He stood at the entrance to her home, hat in hand, unable to meet her gaze. "The cheese and the water," he began, his voice rough. "Lena's fever broke. The doctor said it saved her. She kept it down." He finally looked up, and Alara saw the full depth of his defeat. He was not just a merchant who had lost his inventory. He was a father who had almost lost his child, saved by the very person he had ridiculed. "We need more," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "For the other families, the children, I will pay you. Anything you ask. Name your price." Alara motioned for him to follow her inside. He stepped out of the oppressive heat and into the cool, calm air of her stone home. His eyes widened. He had expected a damp, foul-smelling hovel. Instead, he saw an ordered, clean, and functional world. He saw the neat hearth, the tidy bed of boughs, the tools hanging in their proper places. She led him deeper into the dairy cave. He gasped. Rows upon rows of perfect, pale gold wheels of cheese rested on the stone shelves. The air was cool and smelled sweetly of aging milk and damp earth. It was a treasure hoard, a fortress of life in a world of rot. He stared at the impossible bounty, the sheer, undeniable reality of her success. He saw the channeled water, the secure animal pen, the thought and labor evident in every stone. Everything he had dismissed as foolishness was, in fact, a work of profound and practical genius. The foundation of his worldview, his belief in his own superior judgment, shattered in that cold, quiet cave. He turned to her, his face a mixture of awe and deep, burning shame. "I called it the widow's folly," he said, his voice barely a whisper. He shook his head slowly, the enormity of his misjudgment settling upon him. "My God, Alara, we were the fools." This was her moment of triumph, the vindication she had earned with her own blood and sweat. She could have named any price. She could have savored his humiliation. Instead, she looked at him with a calm, steady gaze that held neither pity nor triumph. Her victory was not in his defeat, but in her own quiet strength. "It is not for sale," she said simply. His face fell. "But it is not being hoarded either. The cheese is for the children and the sick. That is the price. You will help me transport it. You will ensure it goes to those who need it most, with no favor and no fee. We will feed the town, starting with the weakest." She cut a slice from a small wheel and handed it to him, along with a piece of the hard, dense bread she baked on the hearthstone. "There is food," she said. "Eat." The act of grace was more powerful than any accusation. He took the food, his hand trembling, and ate like a man starved. In that simple, shared meal, the old dynamic of power and pity was erased, replaced by a stark and humbling truth. The woman they had cast out had become their salvation. The cheese saved Providence Gulch. Under Elara's direction, Gable organized a fair and orderly distribution. The nutrient-dense food gave strength back to the weak, pulling dozens of people, especially children, back from the brink of starvation. Elara became the quiet, undisputed center of the town's survival. She made several trips into town, not as an outcast, but as a leader, her presence bringing a sense of calm and order to the panicked community. The name, the Quarry Witch, was never spoken again. The children no longer saw a cave girl, but a figure of strength. The Folly Dairy, they started calling her home, the old nickname now imbued with a sense of awe and reverence. When the heat finally broke and the autumn rains came, washing the blight from the fields, the community began to rebuild, but on a new foundation. Their near-total collapse had taught them a hard lesson about their own fragility. They no longer looked at Elara with pity or suspicion, but with a deep and abiding respect. They came to her not for handouts, but for knowledge. Farmers who had once laughed at her hole in the ground now came to study her quarry, asking questions about thermal mass and natural cooling. They began building their own stone-lined cellars, dug deep into the earth, modeled on the principles of her dairy. The women of the town came to learn the art of making hard cheeses that could last through any season, watching her hands as she worked, absorbing the quiet wisdom she had inherited from her mother. Mr. Gable's mercantile was rebuilt, but his influence as the town's sole arbiter of wisdom was gone forever. He became a quieter, more humble man, forever indebted to the woman he had so publicly scorned. Elara's story spread beyond the confines of Providence Gulch, carried by travelers and traders. It became a frontier legend, the story of the widow who built a home from a hole and fed a town with what others had thrown away. Her methods for building and preservation were adopted in other settlements, changing the way people thought about surviving in a harsh and unpredictable land. The landscape itself began to change, as new homes and cellars were built with the enduring strength of stone, not just the fleeting convenience of wood. Years passed. Providence Gulch thrived, its new foundations, both literal and metaphorical, stronger than before. Elara never left her quarry. It was more than a shelter, it was a part of her. She expanded it, adding new chambers, a larger garden, and a small herd of goats whose descendants traced back to the first one, Patience. She never married again, but she was never truly alone. She was the heart of her community, the wise woman of the quarry, a respected elder whose quiet counsel was sought by all. One evening, in the twilight of her life, she stood at the entrance to her home, looking out over the land. It was no longer a barren wasteland, but a place of managed beauty, her gardens and pastures a testament to a life of hard work and foresight. A young dog, a descendant of the loyal Boro, rested at her feet. She was not the desperate, grieving girl who had arrived here with nothing but an axe and a stubborn refusal to break. She was a builder, a survivor, a matriarch. She had built a life not from the prosperity she was given, but from the scraps she was left. Her legacy was not written in ledgers or deeds, but etched into the very stones of the town she had saved, a quiet, enduring monument to resilience, and to the profound wisdom of seeing value where others saw only a worthless hole in the ground.